We are looking at a most unusual set of material in the Old Testament. This little tiny book of Nehemiah that not many pay attention to. And we have found Nehemiah leaving the royal courts of the King Artaxerxes of the Persian Empire. And he's made his way back to Jerusalem. And now, by the time he's back in Jerusalem, he has motivated the people, and the people have said, let's join together and build this wall around the city, the wall that's been disappearing or has disappeared for 90-something years because of the ruthless nature of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. And the work is beginning. The work is going really well. And if you would read chapter 3 of the book of Nehemiah, you would find that we're not going to talk about it. It's just a story of Nehemiah saying, well, this particular person and his family, they built this wall. And next to him, these people built a gate. And next to them, and that's the phrase he uses over and over again, next to them, it's almost like Nehemiah is walking around the entire wall of the city, and he's showing you who's building what, and they're clearing out the rubble, and they're bringing that wall from its foundation back up to its original height. That's the process. But as we begin our lesson this morning, I want you to think about this phrase that Burke's going to put on the screen for you, and see how you feel about the reality of this phrase. To every good work, there is a critic. Now, maybe it'd be more accurate to say, to every good work, there are many critics. And so I want to begin the lesson just thinking about that for a moment, and I want you to think about the idea of criticism. Just think about criticism. Now, I know we like to talk about a couple of different types of criticism, don't we? We talk about constructive criticism, and I guess that's contrasted to something that would be destructive criticism. And perhaps constructive criticism is well needed. I know that no one is perfect, and we all have our flaws, and we all need a little course correction once in a while. But I wonder how you would feel if I told you that most constructive criticism doesn't work. Because most constructive criticism is not done constructively. Most constructive criticism is supposed to be done by someone who cares. They really care about you. They love you. They want your best. And they ought to ask for permission. Do you mind if I tell you something? I care so much about you. Do you mind if I point this out so you can make this little adjustment and life would be even better? But seldom does that happen. And so what we think is constructive for someone becomes over in the destructive camp. Everybody kind of get that? But it's still different. It's not quite as harsh as total destructive criticism, because that's often done out of anger, or that's done out of greed, or it's done out of selfishness, or it's done out of some other kind of motive that shouldn't be. So let me ask you this. How does criticism make you feel? We all do it, don't we? We all criticize. In fact, it comes so naturally and so easily for me, and I know it comes naturally and easily for you, just to criticize, to observe someone, to observe something, and just come out with words of criticism. And not only is it so natural that we criticize, it's really, really natural that we get criticized. How does it make you feel? Well, I think these three words will kind of show you what you feel like when you get criticized: hurt, self-doubt, and discouragement. So can you remember a time when that happened to you? Can you remember a time when you were criticized? It happens to me all the time. It's a way of life to be criticized. And I've been speaking for years and years, and 40 years or so I've been speaking. And I know this phenomena. For example, at one point in my history, a long, long time ago, I signed up to do 25 one-day workshops for a company called Texas Instruments. And I would spend 7 hours talking in an 8-hour day, something like that. And I did it in one plant, and they kind of liked it, and so they sent me to another plant. So I ended up doing 25. I contracted for 25 days. And at the end of each day, I would give an evaluation. I'd have a notebook. We'd work through a notebook, all on the subject of leadership, and I'd give an evaluation. Most of the time, the evaluations came back really, really nice. And I would take someone with me. I would take someone who either worked for us or someone who was close to us, just so they could spend the day and learn something about leadership. And one time I took the chairman of our board of trustees, one of the finest men. We went to this city, this big, big city, and it kind of has this different kind of bent to it in terms of its personality. I did this workshop like I always do. I got the evaluations back. Most of them really good, probably 40 or 50 people in the audience, except for 2. And 2 were so very degrading because they said I used the word gal in my presentation. I used guys and gals, but they were so very offended. And then another time I remember speaking in front of an audience of about 1,500 people. I thought the speech went really pretty well. It wasn't bad. But in the middle of the speech, I talked about something like this. I said there was this very large person. And I didn't think anything about it until the speech was over and a person came to me in a very ugly, harsh way, said, I don't want to rain on your parade, but I'm going to. Now, she didn't say that, but she rained on my parade. Now, guess what? I was wrong. I was wrong. And I say things sometimes before you I should not say. I get kind of carried away. I look over at Jack and see him sleeping. I'm trying to wake him up, and I say something I shouldn't say. And it's not uncommon that I would call Burke or text Burke usually and say, Burke, either remove that lesson yesterday from the internet altogether or edit out this one phrase. And Burke is very good about that. He either removes it completely from all of history or he edits it. Because here's another dimension of all this. None of us do things perfectly. None of us has it all together. We actually all deserve to be criticized. But criticism is something forbidden in the kingdom of God. Because it was Jesus who said, I want to tell you about the old way we used to do things. In the old law, it said you should not kill. But in the new kingdom, the kingdom of mine, my kingdom, here's how I want it to be. I don't want you to even be angry with someone. And I certainly don't want you to use words against other people that will do them harm. Don't call them words like, you know how we do. We make up words for people. Don't even do that. Don't be critical kind of people. Though all of us deserve it. But again, I will tell you, we all do it all the time, don't we? And we become recipients of it. The problem is when we become recipients of it, it produces all that: hurt, self-doubt, and discouragement. You know where it happens a lot? It happens in families. It happens with spouses. Sometimes you get a little angry. Is that possible? You get a little agitated. You get a little frustrated. And so you say something to your spouse, and it's kind of critical, and it's kind of demeaning, and it produces hurt and self-doubt and discouragement. By the way, can you remember any of these things happening in your life? Happens all the time with those of us who are parents. I mean, every parent in the world is guilty of this. You get a little frustrated, you get a little angry, you get a little upset, and all of a sudden here it comes, and you point out how they've done wrongly or what they're doing or a characteristic, and it's And what we don't understand is sometimes they internalize this and it hurts them and they have self-doubt and they're so discouraged. It happens in the workplace frequently, and sometimes they don't even have the courtesy to not do it privately. They do it publicly, and they do it in front of other people, and they point out someone, and they say, here's what you did wrong, here's how you're acting, here's what you're doing, and they humiliate the person, and they produce those 3 words. Happens between siblings. Actually happens in church buildings. Can you imagine that? It happens in church buildings. Happens in school systems. A lot. A lot. It actually happens everywhere. This thing of criticism. How we are so quick to criticize others and say really harsh and ugly things about others. And the interesting thing is they probably deserve it sometimes. I deserve those comments that people make to me at times. Some I don't, some I do. And I'm the first one to understand that. That's why sometimes I catch these things and quickly enough to tell Burke to take them down, but somebody's already seen it by the time I get there. Because here you got the other thing. You got this new phenomena, and it's really not new at all. It's this internet thing, and it's this social media platform. And you know what? You can say things that are really ugly and really harsh about other people and about other entities, and you can say it in such, and nobody knows your name. But the recipient is filled with hurt and self-doubt and discouragement. And that particular hurt and that particular self-doubt, maybe not the discouragement, might last all their lives. And I suspect there's more than one of you in this audience that can go back to some time in high school or even grade school or in your work life years ago, and someone said something, and you remember it just like it was yesterday. To every good work, there are critics. But to everything, there are critics. Same thing is happening in the book of Nehemiah. Same thing is going to happen in the book of Nehemiah. So I want you to read with me and watch what happens in the book of Nehemiah with these critics. We saw a little bit of it in chapter 2, verse 10, but I jumped over it on purpose. I knew this time was coming. We would talk about this. I knew it would not be fun to talk about this topic. I knew it would be better if we move into a small auditorium over there and we do it as a class instead of me trying to do it here. But in chapter 2 and verse 10, we're introduced to these people. When Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah, the Ammonite official, heard about this. What did they hear about? They heard about this idea we're going to build a wall, that someone had come here to help us build a wall. They were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. They're selfish. They're greedy. They don't want the Israelites, they don't want the Jewish people to have any way forward. And maybe they have some selfish gain. Maybe they're easily march into the city of Jerusalem and they take what they want and they do what they want. And maybe they have power over these weakened Jews. But they don't like what's going on. And in chapter 4, here's what they really do. So you begin with me in chapter 4 and verse 1. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and he was incensed. And you know, when you're angry and you're incensed, you don't think very well, right? Remember what I've said to you 1,000 times? Maybe that's a bit of exaggeration, but not too many. When you're angry, your emotions go up, your intellect goes down. When you're really angry, you don't appear to be very smart. They're greatly incensed. So they ridiculed the Jews. And in the presence of his associates, the army of Samaria. He did it publicly. It makes it worse. If Rob comes to me this morning and says, you are absolutely wrong, I don't like how you said it, you were off base, it was privately, we might be able to handle it a little bit. But if Rob stands up at the closing prayer and says, all of you know what he just said was junk, and you elders need to get rid of him, publicly it's what? It's worse. It stings worse. And then he says this, what are those feeble Jews doing? Now, do you notice the adjective, feeble? You watch how criticism works? I got to emphasize, what are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore the wall? This is mockery. Will they offer sacrifice? Will they finish in a day? Do you see the poking of fun, the mockery? Can they bring those stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are? Do they really think they can make this thing work, this big mess they got here? That's the way criticism works. That's the way mockery works. Tobiah, the Ammonite, who was at his side, what are they building? Even a fox climbing on it would break it down. Do you see the ridicule? Do you see the mockery? And by the way, here's the big one. Do you see that people usually come in groups to do it? They don't do this alone very often. They like to be in groups. And so it happens like this sometimes, that a group of young girls will look at one young girl over here, and maybe she doesn't look the same, or maybe she doesn't have the ability to dress in the same kind of clothes, or maybe they just don't like her, or maybe one of the group is jealous of her, and so she gets the other group going with her, and they say such ugly and mean things about this one little girl, and they post it now on social media. And the same thing happens to some little boys. There are some boys that are getting older, and they're different. You know, you got the ones that play football, and you got the ones that are great big, and here's the one over here and doing things a little differently, looks a little differently. And so they keep pushing, and they keep saying, and they keep mocking, and they do it as a group, because as a group they feel like they're justified, and they feel like they're powerful. Do you see how ugly this all is? Am I making my point? And all the while, Jesus says to the kingdom of God people, don't you ever act like that. Don't you ever mock people with your words. Don't you ever call people names. Don't you ever belittle people. Even though they might deserve it. Because no one is perfect. I make so many mistakes. It just doesn't help me when you point them out in groups and harshly and meanly. It doesn't help me at all. It makes my life worse. So I guess the question is, if this is so real, it happens all the time, how are you and I supposed to respond to it? Now, as natural as criticism is, so is my usual response. You know how I like to respond? You know what my first inclination response is? Call me a name. You know what my first reaction is? Let me tell you about you, Mr. Rob. Let me tell you about you, Janet. I saw you in the first grade. I know what you were like. You know, it just feels good to do that. And if I'm where I can, it feels good just to do something like that. Isn't that our first response to? And yet here comes this man named Jesus, who is the King of all kings, the Lord of all lords, and he established a kingdom of saved people. He's going to take them to heaven someday. And he said, now, by the way, I don't want you talking badly about anybody. But if they talk badly about you, I don't want you to respond in like kind. I want you to pray for them. What? You expect me to do that? Here Nehemiah is, years and years and years living before Jesus would ever come, and watch what he does. He prays. Now, but before you read this prayer, don't we always think when we pray that we got to be kind of quiet and we got to be very careful how our words are, and we got to be just so good in our prayers? Not this one. Hear us, O God, for we are despised. Despised means we're being mocked. We're being talked about in ugly ways and wrong ways. Turn their insults, that's what the criticism usually is, insults, back on their heads. Give them over as plunder in the land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of your builders. Have you ever heard the word venting? You venting? Sometimes I do it. I walk into someone's office and they're safe and they understand, and I close the door and I said, I just want to vent for a moment. I don't want any advice. I've just had it and I want to vent for a moment. And they sit back and they just listen as I go on a tirade. That's literally true. And I say, thank you. I leave and I'm better. He's venting toward God, not about God. But he's smart enough to know I need to keep this between God and me. So my walking into someone's office and closing the door may not be the right thing to do. Do you hear me? May not be the right thing to do. Maybe I ought to close my door and say to God, God, these people are wrong and they're mistreating us and they're stopping your work and they're hindering your work. Will you deal with them? And Jesus, in that same sermon, when he said pray for them, he said, by the way, that's all you need to do. You do not need to fight them. You do not need to carry out an attack against them. Isn't that strange behavior? Well, can you imagine what God thought about that prayer? Can you almost visualize God with maybe a tiny smile on his face, looking at Nehemiah saying, Nehemiah, I know what they're doing. I understand all that. I really appreciate you telling me this. I will take care of them. I will deal with them. That's how God made the promise. I will deal with them. They criticize you, they mock you, they try to stop your progress, they try to stop you from going forward. I will deal with them. We might ought to remember that. We might ought to remember that because we're so quick to criticize, or I'm so quick to criticize. But we need to continue. Here's what I really want to tell all of you. I know it hurts when you're criticized. And I know you get all kinds of self-doubt. Self-doubt feels like this for me. I just don't know if I'm up to the job. I just don't know if I should do this anymore. It would be easier just to go and hide. And discouragement, don't you just detest discouragement? When it drains the life out of you and drains the energy out of you and you don't have any bounce to your sniff, you don't have any smile to your face, and you have the wrinkles coming more than they should be. I mean, with me, you can't tell the difference, but you know how that works. But don't let it stop you from doing what God has called us to do. Don't let it stop us from being who God wants us to be. And it doesn't stop Nehemiah. Now, the critics won't go away. You got to understand this. The critics will never leave us. They will never go away. When we're doing something good, we call it Satan, and properly so. Satan is going to see to it that he does everything he can to impede everything we do going forward. He doesn't want any of us to improve. He doesn't want any of our marriages to be good. He doesn't want anyone to exceed in anything. He wants to stop us. One of his tools is this thing of criticism. But don't stop doing the good. Watch what Nehemiah does. So we rebuilt the wall. We just kept right on going until it reached half its height. For the people worked with all their heart. I mean, can you imagine? We blink our eyes and the wall's half up. That probably took them longer than that, but not a lot longer. Again, let me give you a little preview. That which had not been able to be done for over 90 years, maybe closer to 100 years, they'll do it in 52 days. They'll do it in 52 days. They will do once again, by the grace of God, by the help of God, by the providence of God, the impossible. At this point in the story, it's half done. But, when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod, oh my, now they're getting everybody involved. Now the critics have gone and found reinforcements. Now they got mob mentality coming. When they heard the repairs of Jerusalem's walls had gone ahead, the gaps are being closed, they were angry. Even more angry. Got a bunch of people angry now. And they plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against them. But what does Nehemiah do? We just prayed to our God. Now, we did post a guard day and night to meet the threat. We didn't go out and fight. We didn't go looking for anything, but we did stay on our guard. Now, I don't know how to interpret that. I don't know how to apply that to our lives, but I will tell you this. When you're trying to do good and the critics are all around you, just stay away from them. Just stay to your business. Surround yourself with people who are the right kind of people. If I could tell young people anything, I would say be really, really careful about the people you hang around, because they're going to take you one way or another, and they need to take you the good way. But that's up to you. Be really, really careful. So I text our grandchildren fairly often. I say different things, but one of my more common things right now to say, be a leader, not a follower. That's all I say. Be a leader, not a follower. So what I want you to know is just beware of the critic. They're always going to be there. They're always going to stop you. But don't believe them. Yeah, you have faults. I have faults. I need correction. But that kind of correction only ends up hurting me and discouraging me and producing self-doubt in me, and I don't need any of that right now. So just stay with the people who are more safe. Surround yourself with the right people and keep doing the good work. Now, finally, think of Jesus. Was anybody any more criticized than Jesus? He had people just like Sanballat and Tobiah and a bunch more who did not like him. They did not like what he was saying. They did not like he was coming to build a new kingdom he kept talking about. They thought he was going to take away from them. He was only going to enhance what they were doing under the old law. They just couldn't get it. They criticized and they criticized and they criticized. I have no doubt that it hurt. I have no doubt that he got discouraged. I have no doubt that there were times he probably looked and said, "Are you sure this is the way we want to do it?" But he never stopped. He never stopped. And he stayed with those apostles, though they were far from perfect. And he stayed with the others, though they were far from perfect. And he just kept going and kept going and kept going. I don't know if beware the critic is the right word or just don't believe them. Though what some of they say is true. Just stop listening if you possibly can. Jesus would not listen to the point that it stopped him. He continued all the way to the end so that we get to read his words today of how we're supposed to live, and we live with confidence that we are saved people. It's really a good deal. I never read the paper. But as soon as I had it laying out on a footstool, I opened it up, and I turned over the obituaries, and it was a bunch, like 4 people in our little community had died. Not a problem. Not a problem if you die in the Lord. Not a problem. Well, it'll leave some people behind hurt. It'll change some things for some people. But for them, it's the best it can be.